Story time with Mr. Beat.
Oh, hey! Dear Mr. Beat, how about a video about Kansas native Amelia Earhart? Heck yeah! Here's the story of the American aviation pioneer, Amelia Earhart. Once upon a time, on July 24th, 1897, a little girl was born in Atchison, Kansas. Her parents named this little girl Amelia Mary Earhart, after both of her grandmothers. As a child, Amelia was adventurous, spending lots of time with her younger sister Grace, climbing trees, collecting bugs, hunting rats with a rifle, and exploring the neighborhood. Because of this, many historians have described Earhart as a, quote, tomboy growing up. When Amelia saw her first plane at the Iowa State Fair, she was actually not impressed at all, and asked if she could go back to the merry-go-round. Throughout her teen years, she moved around the Midwest with her family, eventually graduating from Hyde Park High School in Chicago in 1915. After spending a year and a half at school at Ogons in Pennsylvania, Earhart visited her sister in Toronto, Canada. There, after seeing wounded soldiers returning from World War I, she decided to quit school to work as a nurse's aide in a military hospital. While working there, Amelia got to know many of the wounded pilots and grew to admire them. She spent much of her free time watching the Royal Flying Corps practicing at a nearby airfield. In 1919, Earhart went back to school at Columbia University in New York, but quit a year later to be with her formerly estranged parents who had reunited in California. On December 28, 1920, a pivotal moment happened in Earhart's life. She attended an air show in Long Beach with her dad, and she took a 10-minute plane ride that forever changed her life. She recalled, quote,
"By the time I had got 200 or 300 feet off the ground, I knew I had to fly."
Unquote. Amelia's new mission was to learn how to fly, and she worked her butt off to achieve this new dream. She worked several odd jobs to save up for the very expensive flying lessons. She read everything she could find about flying, and spent much of her time just hanging out at the airfield. She cropped her hair short like other women aviators did. She wore a leather jacket, but aware that other aviators would be judging her, slept in it for 3 nights to give the jacket a, quote, worn look. In the summer of 1921, Earhart purchased a used, bright yellow Kenner Airster biplane. She nicknamed it the Canary. Before she even had a pilot's license, Amelia had flown her plane to 14,000 feet, the world altitude record for female pilots. On May 15, 1923, Earhart became only the 16th woman to be issued such a license. In the mid-1920s, Earhart was not able to make a living as only a pilot, so became a teacher for a short while and later a social worker at Dennison House, living in Medford, Massachusetts. She also wrote local newspaper columns promoting flying and became a bit of a local celebrity. One afternoon in April 1928, a phone call came for Earhart at work. At first, she thought the phone call was a prank. "How would you like to be the first woman to fly the Atlantic?" Captain Hilton H. Rayleigh asked her on the other line. "Yes," Amelia promptly replied. Here's where Earhart became a worldwide celebrity. She became the first female to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, but only as a passenger, as Wilmer Stoltz and Lewis Gordon acted as pilots. The flight made headlines around the world because 3 different pilots had died within the past year trying to be that first woman to fly across the Atlantic. When the 3 returned to the United States, they were greeted with a parade in New York and a reception held by President Calvin Coolidge at the White House. Despite the newfound fame and glory, Amelia still was hungry for more, later saying she felt like she, quote,
"Was just like baggage, like a sack of potatoes."
Unquote. However, her celebrity status now got her things like an editor position at Cosmopolitan magazine and money to finance future flights. In August 1928, Amelia became the first woman to fly solo across the North American continent and back. In 1929, she entered Will Rogers' Powerpuff Derby and placed 3rd. Earhart also became involved with the 99s, an organization of female pilots advancing the support and cause of women in aviation. She became their first president in 1930. During the time she was becoming famous, she had been engaged to a man named Samuel Chapman. However, on November 23, 1928, she broke it off with him and began to have a relationship with her publicist, George Putnam. The two would eventually get married on February 7th, 1931, although Amelia had turned Putnam's proposals down 6 times before she finally agreed to marry him. Earhart's ideas about marriage were well ahead of their time. She believed that both of them should have equal responsibility of bringing in money, and she even kept her maiden name instead of taking George's last name. She referred to her marriage as a, quote, partnership with, quote, dual control. Meanwhile, the only aviator Amelia Earhart had to beat left was Amelia Earhart. She never stopped trying to outdo herself. In 1931, Earhart set a world altitude record of 18,415 feet. But that wasn't enough. Amelia wanted to do some bigger solo flights. On May 20th, 1932, exactly 5 years after Charles Lindbergh took off across the Atlantic by himself, Earhart took off from Harbor Grace, Newfoundland to Paris. However, strong winds, icy conditions, and mechanical problems forced her to land in a pasture in Northern Ireland. When a local resident asked, "Have you flown far?" Earhart reportedly replied,
"From America."
She now was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. Though many had tried it before, on January 11, 1935, Earhart became the first person to fly solo from Honolulu, Hawaii to Oakland, California. In fact, between 1930 and 1935, Amelia had set 7 women's speed and distance aviation records in several different types of planes. As she neared her 40th birthday, she was ready for the biggest and final challenge of her career. She wanted to be the first woman to fly completely around the world. Her first attempt began on March 17, 1937. Earhart and her crew took off from Oakland, but their aircraft ended up getting heavily damaged, and they were not able to get past Hawaii. For the second attempt, Earhart decided to travel west to east due to changes in global wind and weather patterns. Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, discreetly flew from Oakland to Miami. While in Miami, Earhart publicly announced her plans to circumnavigate the globe, and the media went crazy. On June 1st, 1937, Earhart and Noonan left Miami to begin the 29,000-mile trip. By June 29th, they had landed in New Guinea with all but 7,000 miles left to complete the journey. On July 2nd, the two took off again, only to never be seen by anyone ever again. They were set to arrive at Howland Island, a tiny little island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, aka the middle of nowhere. The 450-acre island is uninhabited, but airstrips were constructed to accommodate Amelia's planned stopover. The plane never arrived. The ship that was anchored at Howland lost touch with Earhart and Noonan after 8:45 that morning. To this day, no one knows exactly why or exactly where their plane went down, though many investigators still search for clues. There is one strong theory, backed by the physical evidence of several artifacts, that Earhart and Noonan might have landed at the uninhabited island of Nikumaroro, which is where they would ultimately die. Though no definitive proof of her fate yet exists, there is no doubt about Amelia Earhart's legacy. Obviously, she was a pioneer in aviation. She definitely proved that a woman could do anything a man could do. She was a visionary. She was courageous, ambitious, and a true leader. Because of this, she is certainly one of the most inspiring figures in American history. The end.